Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace and mercy of Allah be with you. Good day everyone and good day sir. Today I'll be presenting socialism based on the principles and analytical framework of Vladimir Lenin. To start with, let's have a glimpse on the historical setup or social setup during his time. So prior to the birth of Soviet Union in 1917, there's already an existing and prevailing patrimonial state ruled by the Tsarists. However, the Tsarists is not just, a simple ruler of the state, but also the lords of the land. They've acquired a vast colossus of land ranging from the east of the Pacific to Poland, to Ukraine, to Central Asia, and to the Baltic state. However, the intensifying gravity of discontent and repression against the peasantry amalgamated by their defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, it precipitated a revolution with a rallying call to convince Tsar Nicholas II to transform the government system from autocratic and gearing towards a constitutional monarchy. The Tsarist rule have imposed an atmosphere of oppression and repression, resulted into pockets of instability. The freedom of press is curtailed. No freedom of speech as well as association. There is only few political rights and no minority rights. Not until in 1917, when a group of people rallied to avenge themselves, to be free from the pockets of oppression. In November 1917, finally, the Bolshevik Revolution occurred, and it was headed by Vladimir Lenin, deposing the Tsarist rule. The Bolsheviks were rooted from Russian Social Democratic Party. However, because of clash of principles and ideals, the Bolshevik faction were finally established. Its leaders are, not a working class, but an educated, privileged, and intellectuals. However, they believe that they embody the sentiments, the interest of the working class, with their highlighted slogan, land, peace, and bread. The vanguards party who administered the Bolsheviks and later on founded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was the first communist party to hold government power. However, the journey of the vanguards party towards its desired ends was coupled with unprecedented challenges. In 1918 to 1921, they were confronted by a civil war because of their war communism, which was mechanized through state control of economic sectors and requisitionings of grains from the working class. And as a result, in 1921 to 1922, 5 million Russians were died because of famine. And, to mend the problem, they have introduced a new economic policy wherein there is a minimization on states' control and as well as moderation of rules so as to pave way to accommodate the private businesses. Now that we have already a partial knowledge about Vladimir Lenin, let's widen our brushstrokes and let's know who really Lenin is. So basically, Lenin was born in Simbirsk, now is the Ulyanovsk, situated in south of Moscow. He came from a wealthy and middle-class family. His father is a school inspector. However, their family have, experienced an extreme sorrow because of the death of his brother, who was hanged because of an alleged involvement in a attempt assassination of Tsar Alexander III. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin is a lawyer by profession. He is one of many who believes on the teaching of Marx and Engels, and their thoughts became guiding principles for Lenin during the revolution. The Vanguard's party, who administered the Bolsheviks and later founded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, it was led by Lenin, and it was the first communist party who holds government power. He introduced also a new economic policy wherein its goal is to mend the impoverishment and as well as the famine way back 1921. The very goal of this new economic policy is to minimize the government involvement or its control over the economy, as well as to accommodate private businesses by moderation of rules of the government. Now let's proceed on the very idea of Vladimir Lenin. So basically, he believes that to be successful, an insurrection must rely on the action of the masses. So here we can see the relation or the link between success and mass or a group of people. So basically, he acknowledged that a united masses is very powerful, and it is just appropriate that change must begin on this mass. They must, do some actions, because he acknowledged that this mass is the working class who were deficient in many aspects, particularly in understanding of matters surrounding them, as to why they are oppressed, as to why they are neglected. So primarily, he believes, at the very first, he believed that the mass is powerful. Second, as Lenin believed or adhered that the united mass is powerful, or a united people is powerful, he also argued that to inspire the masses into action, a vanguard's party is needed. So, as I have said, this masses is considered by Lenin as the group of the working class people who have, many deficiencies in many aspects. And he didn't believe that this working class would develop or spontaneously develop a revolutionary class consciousness so as to address whatever grievances or oppression, exploitation that they are experiencing against the bourgeois. So for Lenin, there must be a need for a revolutionary party, and that is the vanguard's party, so that someone or there will be some group that would stimulate, that would steer the vote of this working class, so that they would take actions to address the exploitations or whatever grievances that they are experiencing. So technically, what is this vanguard's party? This vanguard's party is composed of intellectuals, composed of privileged individuals and educated individuals. So they are not working class, but they believe that they represent the interests, the ideals, the sentiments of this working class, and they would bring whatever they can best render the service or the aspirations of this working class. So they just represent the interests of this working class, but they belong into somehow middle class. As Lenin acknowledged the power of the mass as well as the role of the vanguard's party to inspire the mass, in the third phase of his idea, he have argued that the aims and interests of the vanguard's party must be in tune with those of the masses to carry the masses with them. Here, he put forward the importance of that the interest of the vanguard's party must be congruent to the interest of the masses. The interest of the vanguard's party must not be crafted anywhere or everywhere. It must be rooted on the real experience of the working class or of the masses, because that's the only way for Lenin to mobilize this working class to take actions as to to their problems concerning the bourgeois, on their problems about exploitations or other grievances. That's the only way so that they will take part on the revolution, and that's the only way that the masses become so much powerful. And the key is a unifying idea that would fuel the revolution. And finally, he have argued that politics begins where the masses are. So, in conclusion to his idea, he really put forward and emphasized the role of the masses in politics, the role of the masses in revolution, the role of the mass in achieving the desired ends of any actions. Without the mass, there is no such real power, because power relies on the power of the people. The absolute power resides onto the people. So now let's proceed on the major work of Vladimir Lenin in 1902, which is entitled What is to be Done. Basically, it is a principle, a blueprint on gearing towards socialism, and on how to provide a mechanism so as to educate the proletariat, and on how to establish a party that will going to lead the proletariat and bring socialism into power. Meanwhile, others have argued that what is to be done simply deals with raising consciousness to the proletariat as well as to the organization that will going to educate them. Meanwhile, some relative argument have just argued that it is just an introductory point, a point of consideration in making a new organization. Lenin have argued that there must be an organization of professional revolutionaries that have, constant contact with the workers, guiding them but not representing them. While the others have understood what is to be done as a mechanism or as a dynamics to deviate from Marxism and instead focus on Leninism. While there are some, arguments also which believes or affirms that what is to be done is a weapon to supersede any system so as to install socialism. Basically, freedom of criticism is one of the most controversial issue between the socialist and liberal states in the world, because freedom of criticism is nothing but a new phase of opportunism. Freedom means freedom for an opportunist trend in social democracy. freedom to convert social democracy into a democratic party of reform, freedom to introduce bourgeois ideas and bourgeois elements into socialism. For Lenin, it is a powerful word, a noble word, indeed. However, under the banner of freedom of industry, the most predatory war was waged. Under the banner of freedom of labor, the working people were robbed. For this reason, freedom of criticism remains to be in the hotbed of controversy. Furthermore, the spontaneity of the masses and the consciousness of the Social Democrats dwells particularly on their historical experience between 60s, 70s, and half of 90s, where there is an reoccurring strikes all around Russia. Explicitly, these strikes were showing or manifesting that the sleeping giants is finally awake, and that is the working class. However, those are just, struggles. It is not yet a social democratic struggle. But then its indication is clear that the working class is starting to take an action, that they are becoming conscious on the exploitation that they are experiencing onto their employers. Thus, there must be, a political consciousness within them, within the working class. They must know what they are fighting for. How important are these issues to fight for? And they must know that they are fighting for something, and it is not just for the future, but this is for themselves and for the benefit of their children's and children's. Meanwhile, with regards on to the trade unionist politics and social democratic politics, Rabotchi Dailo, in his literature of exposure and proletarian struggle, he argued that the goal is not only to expose a system which resides in the working class path towards emancipation and development, but it must also include a mechanism, a strategic mechanism to respond immediately on the changing interests of the proletariat. The difficulties of the working class brought by the capitalism and some other trade system will be the awakening call to them, to the exploitation. And this is where the struggle begins, and as well as the spread of socialism. In this status quo, Social Democrats is not only confined in economic consciousness or struggle, but also it includes employing political education to the working class. So here they underline the importance of instigating knowledge to the working class, because only by having a knowledge on the matters surrounding them would be there a beginning to where they would take an actions with regards into it. Social democracy does not only concern or lead the working class struggles, but they will going to help them onto liberating from a system where they have minimum rights, and they were constantly being oppressed. So that's the very goal of the Social Democrat. So finally, the last discussion in the work of Lenin is the primitiveness of the economists and the organization of the revolutionaries. Here, Lenin acknowledged that economic struggle can be the best foundation of political struggle in their quest for change. Primitiveness in a sense that no arms, no trainings, and no connections in their quest or as they marched in the street and rallied for change. This particular strategy was tested in 1894 to 1901, where there is a circle of students who rallied as if they were like peasants, and they have no trainings. They are primitive, no trainings, no arms, and no connections. However, in a very short duration of time, they were able to expand. They were able to look for connections and linkages with other revolutionary organizations. So explicitly, they were able to expand. However, this particular strategy is heavily challenged because given that they have lack of trainings, they only have it hinders them to carry out a heavy organizational works, and it also denotes a limited scope of revolutionary works. This particular strategy is for some arguments that it's like the working class. They are primitive in many aspects. They have lack of knowledge in many aspects. So then Lenin argued that there is a need for some revolutionary party, and there is a need for a political struggle. However, this political struggle, the reasons as to why there is a political struggle must be consonance to the reason as to why there is an economic struggle, because the consonance of reasons will booster or will help to strengthen the cause of the revolution. Lenin put some differences on the political and economic struggle, because at the end of the day he argued that they do not completely share the same grievances. There are differences among them. In a concise manner, Lenin emphasized that workers' organization must be in a first place to be a trade union organization, and second, it must be broad as possible, and finally, it must be accessible to all if the condition will permit. Furthermore, he also emphasized on the organization of the revolutionaries. Here is the political. First, it must be consist of revolutionary people who make revolution as their profession. So definitely, he is referring to the Social Democrats. And with regards to the explicit differences between the workers' organization and the organization of the revolutionaries, they must find a common ground, a common denominator. He's referring to the reasons of the struggle, because if these differences will continue to thrive, it will create divisions between the revolutionaries. So it is not good for Lenin. That's why these differences must be eliminated for the success of the revolution and to achieve whatever goals they wanted to achieve at the end. We are done on the discussion of his work. Now we will going to proceed on analysis of his thoughts and work. Vladimir Lenin is indeed one of a kind who have liberated Russian people from a primitive and repressive ruling of the Tsar. He is one of a kind who makes possible what's seemingly impossible. From theory to reality, and he bridged the past and the present. His work, What is to be Done, is very much interesting and relevant in the contemporary times. Why? Primarily because we are in the era of capitalism, where abuse and negligence are more likely to happen. For example, various common workers were suffering because of a very minimum wage that is not even sufficient or enough to sustain their family, and are not even equitable to the products, to the quality and quantity of the products and services they are producing. Their wage are not determined by the quality of the products they are producing, but rather on the basis of the quantity of the products, which basically a form of abuse. Capitalists have exhausted their laborers too much in their aim for mass production, but they were not compensating them well enough. So it's about time to ask what is to be done, because basically this work of Lenin is a blueprint to liberate the working class from oppressive employers or government. So it's about time. Second, the work of Lenin is relevant because more than ever, the humanity is heavily challenged because of the pandemic. Many have lost their jobs, millions have died, billions were suffering from hunger, suffering from poverty, and many have protested in the streets to call their government because of the very poor response against the pandemic. So we are heavily challenged. And with this, it is just right to ask what is to be done. It is just right to steer the spirit of consciousness, the spirit of unity to of the people, and take an actions to address the problem. So explicitly, Lenin is right. As I've said, he is bridging the time from past to the present. His work is still relevant. Finally, my third point as to why I've argued that Lenin's thought is still relevant after the present is our problem above the pandemic, above the problem brought by the capitalism. Humanity have much bigger problem that have yet to come, and that is our problem with climate change. We may not now experiencing its worst effect, but sooner we will, and we will pay the cost. More than ever, this is the time where humanity has to unite and has to speak and voice out to address the problem, because it couldn't be addressed in one or two states, because the enemy here is powerful states, US, China, France, United Kingdom, and others. So then we have to unite, because there's no other way. There's no other way to hinder or contain the environmental exploitation done by these powerful countries than the power of a united masses. Finally, let's proceed on the influence of Vladimir Lenin. He had a wide influence throughout the world. One of it is that never undermine the power of a conscious and united masses, because the real power resides where the masses are. And we have, in the Philippine context, we have this kind of historical experience. In 1986, People's Power Revolution, where because of the united masses, because of the power of the mass, we were able to topple down an oppressive regime of President Ferdinand Marcos. Not just on the Philippines, of course. Particularly in China, China have adopted a further doctrine of Leninism, which they referred it as Mao Leninism. And as well as there were many countries who have rulings based on the guidelines or principles of Leninism, like North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, and Laos, who holds Marxist-Leninism as their political ideology. To summarize the works, thoughts, and principle of Lenin, he make it very simple actually, that he acknowledged that a united mass, a conscious and united masses is very powerful. However, he also emphasized that this mass is primitive, meaning they have lack in many aspects, and in that sense, there must be a vanguard's party that will going to inspire them, that will going to educate them, and that will going to awaken their consciousness on the exploitations around them. This vanguard's party will be composed of educated, privileged, middle class, and educated individuals that will going to lead and represent the aspiration of the working class. It is extremely significant that there must be conscious, because that's the only way that they will going to take part in the revolution. And at the end of the day, Lenin have argued that a real power resides into the masses. So convincing them to take an action is extremely significant. With regards unto his work, what is to be done, it is very interesting and relevant because it is a blueprint on how to formulate or establish an effective organization on how to liberate the people from the exploitation of the government or of their employees. So generally, Lenin is one of a kind. Lenin is have contributed much to the humanity, and what's great about him is that he put forward, he really emphasized that the mass, the people is powerful, and that power is not on the real power is not on a single individual, but on the people. So that's all for the discussion about Vladimir Lenin and his framework of socialism. Thank you so much, everyone.